Nevada is known for bright neon lights and endless lonely deserts. Millions visit seeking an escape, but for a tragic few, they never return. Today, we're covering the 10 most mysterious, disturbing disappearances in Nevada history. These cases totally defy logic and fuel nightmares. If you love the unexplained, please take a second to hit subscribe. Now, step away from the neon lights, look into the dark desert, and let's begin. Let me tell you about a place that was specifically, meticulously, almost obsessively designed to watch you. Laughlin, Nevada, 1992. If you've never been, picture a miniature Las Vegas bolted onto the muddy banks of the Colorado River, about 90 minutes southeast of the Strip. It's a town that exists for one reason: gambling. By the early 90s, Laughlin was booming. The Colorado Belle, the Flamingo Hilton, the Pioneer, these weren't little roadside card rooms. These were full-scale casino resorts, riverboat-themed and neon-drenched, packed wall-to-wall with tourists feeding quarters into slot machines, elbowing each other at buffet lines, and shuffling between blackjack tables in a permanent haze of cigarette smoke and complimentary cocktails. And every single inch of it was on camera. See, casinos don't trust anyone. That's the whole business model. They call it the eye in the sky, a honeycomb of surveillance cameras embedded in those dark mirrored ceiling domes you've probably noticed but never thought much about. Every table, every hallway, every elevator bank, every entrance, every exit, every cashier cage. In a 1990s casino, you could not physically exist on that property without being recorded. That's the point. The house always watches. So here's the question that should keep you up tonight. How does a woman spend an entire weekend inside one of these surveillance fortresses and never appear on a single frame of tape? The answer, once you think about it long enough, is horrifying. She didn't. John Marie Moore was 59 years old, a well-known civic figure from Apple Valley, California, a desert community out in San Bernardino County. She'd served as the honorary mayor of the town, which tells you something about who she was: sociable, prominent, the kind of person people recognized at the grocery store. She stood about 5'2", 125 pounds, with brown wavy hair and brown eyes. She had a distinctive scar on her abdomen. She was not the type of woman who blended into wallpaper. In April of 1992, Jean was newly engaged to a man named Al Henderson. The story, as Henderson told it, was simple and cheerful. The two of them were driving out to Laughlin for a fun little casino getaway. A couple's trip. Slot machines, river views, cheap steak dinners, maybe a Dixieland band on the gaming floor. Nothing complicated, nothing sinister. They checked into the Colorado Belle on April 6th. Henderson handled the check-in. The hotel's internal records confirm that 2 meals were delivered to the room that first day. 2 people, 2 meals. Everything tracks. And then, slowly, quietly, the numbers start to change. Now, this is where you need to pay very close attention, because the devil in this case is buried in the most mundane detail imaginable: hotel meal records. On Monday, April 6th, 2 meals are ordered to the room. Fine. On Tuesday the 7th, 1 meal. On Wednesday the 8th, 1 meal again. By Thursday the 9th, the day Jean supposedly vanishes, 0. Let's think about that. If 2 people are on a casino vacation together, they both eat. It's not like one of them suddenly decided to fast for spiritual enlightenment in the middle of a gambling trip. The caloric math is brutal and simple. By Tuesday, there is only enough food being ordered for 1 human being in that room, which means either Jean stopped eating or Jean stopped being in the room. But Henderson's story doesn't acknowledge any of this. According to him, everything was fine. According to him, they were having a wonderful time. According to him, on the evening of April 8th, Jean hit a hot streak at the Flamingo Hilton down the road and won $600 on the slots. She was so excited, he said, that she insisted they extend their stay to ride her luck. Sounds great, right? A fun little anecdote about a lucky night at the casino, except for one problem. A big one. On the evening of April 8th, The exact same evening, Henderson claims Jean was winning $600 at a slot machine in Laughlin, Nevada. A highly credible independent witness reported seeing both Jean and Al together at a gas station back in Apple Valley, California. Apple Valley is 150 miles from Laughlin. Let that sit for a second. Henderson's story places Jean inside a Nevada casino, thrilled about her winnings, begging to stay another night. A witness places the couple 150 miles away, back in their hometown, on the same evening. These two things cannot both be true. One of them is a lie, and the witness had absolutely no reason to fabricate a sighting at a random gas station. So what was actually happening on April 8th? Was the Laughlin trip already over? Had they driven home and come back? Or, and this is the question that reframes the entire case, was the $600 jackpot story invented from scratch to anchor Jean's disappearance to a location 150 miles from wherever she actually was? Here's Henderson's account of Thursday, April 9th. He says he dropped Jean off near the casino entrance at around 9:30 in the morning so she could gamble while he parked the car and started loading up for checkout. They were supposed to meet back at the hotel room at 11:45. He parks his 1987 Cadillac in the valet area. He waits. 11:45 comes and goes. No Jean. Now, a normal person in this situation, your fiancé doesn't show up, you'd panic almost immediately. You'd start calling her name on the casino floor, you'd ask the front desk, you'd flag security. Henderson, he checks out of the room. He walks down to the casino floor. He plays several hands of blackjack at the Colorado Bell. And then, eventually, at some unspecified later point, he gets around to mentioning to someone that his fiancée seems to be missing. But here's the thing. None of that even matters. Because when investigators did the most obvious thing in the world, they went to the Flamingo Hilton security office and pulled the surveillance tapes from April 9th, they found something that should have blown this case wide open. Jean-Marie Moore does not appear on a single frame. Not one. This is the part of the story where everything flips upside down. Investigators didn't just check the morning she disappeared. They reviewed the surveillance footage for the entire duration of the supposed trip, days of tape, hundreds of hours, multiple camera angles covering every entrance, every gaming floor, every restaurant, every elevator, every parking structure. Jean Moore is on none of it. Zero footage, not a glimpse, not a blurry shoulder in the background of a crowd shot, nothing. The cameras did, however, capture one person quite clearly, Al Henderson, walking through the valet parking area, alone. Now, let's apply some basic logic. You are a 59-year-old woman on a multi-day casino vacation. Over the course of 3 or 4 days, you have to walk through the lobby, you have to ride an elevator, you have to pass through a hallway to get to your room. If you're gambling, you're sitting at a slot machine for hours under a camera dome. If you're eating at the restaurant, you're on tape. If you're cashing out at the cashier cage after winning $600, you are absolutely on tape. Casinos record every single cash transaction. It is, by any reasonable standard of physics and architecture, impossible to spend multiple days inside a modern casino without being captured on surveillance footage. Jean Moore was not a trained intelligence operative. She was an honorary mayor from Apple Valley who liked slot machines. The only explanation that accounts for all of the evidence, the shrinking meal count, the Apple Valley sighting, and the total absence from surveillance, is the one nobody wanted to say out loud at first. Jean Moore was never in that casino, not on April 9th, possibly not after April 6th, maybe not at all. The question was never, where did Jean go in Laughlin? The question was always, did Jean ever make it to Laughlin in the first place? Think about this from a cold, strategic perspective. If you needed to explain why someone was suddenly gone, a casino town is almost the perfect setting. Thousands of strangers cycling through every day. People arrive, people leave, nobody knows anybody. There's no neighborhood watch. There are no nosy next-door neighbors who'd notice something was off. You check into a hotel, you tell the police your partner wandered off on the gaming floor, and you shrug. She was right here. And then she wasn't. In a town built on transience, that story almost works. Almost. until the cameras tell a different story, and the cameras weren't the only thing. When investigators later executed a search warrant on Henderson's motorhome, they found wadded-up tissues on the floor stained with human blood. That's not a paper cut from opening a birthday card. Those are cleanup materials. Combined with the surveillance void, the shrinking meal records, and the witness who placed them back in California on the night of the supposed jackpot, the circumstantial evidence points in one direction with almost gravitational force. Al Henderson remained the prime suspect for the rest of his life. He died in 2001, 9 years after Jean's disappearance, without ever being charged. He maintained his innocence until the end. Jean's body has never been found. There's no crime scene in this case, no body, no weapon, no confession, no forensic smoking gun. What there is, instead, is an absence. A void shaped exactly like a person, a hotel room where the meal count drops by 1, a casino floor where a woman is supposed to be sitting but isn't, hundreds of hours of surveillance tape with a Jean Moore-shaped hole in every single frame. And that's what makes this case so deeply unsettling. It's not the violence. We don't even know for certain there was violence. It's the fabrication. It's the idea that someone could construct an entire narrative, a fun casino trip, a lucky night at the slots, a woman who just wandered off, and plant it so confidently that it took investigators pulling tape to realize none of it was real. Jean-Marie Moore didn't disappear from a casino in Laughlin, Nevada. She disappeared from somewhere else entirely. And wherever that somewhere is, it's a place with no cameras, no witnesses, and no answers. She was reported missing from a building she was never inside, a ghost on the guest register, the woman who was never there. I want you to do something for me. Pull up a satellite image of Interstate 80 between Wells and Battle Mountain, Nevada. Zoom in. Now, zoom out. Keep zooming out. You'll notice something. There is nothing. For roughly 200 miles, the highway cuts a single thin line across a landscape so vast, so flat, and so aggressively empty that it looks like the surface of another planet. At night, with your headlights on, it's worse. The beams reach maybe 300 feet into the dark and then just stop, swallowed by an ocean of black sagebrush that stretches to the horizon in every direction. There are no streetlights, no houses, no gas stations for 50, 60, sometimes 80 miles. The cell service drops to nothing in the valleys between the mountain ranges. If something goes wrong out here after sunset, you are alone in a way that most Americans have never experienced. On the night of April 13, 2011, an 86-year-old World War II veteran named Patrick Carnes was driving this exact stretch of road in a dark green Subaru station wagon. He had his dog in the passenger seat. He'd been pulled over by a state trooper just an hour earlier, and the dashcam footage shows a man who was calm, coherent, and perfectly fine. By sunrise the next morning, the Subaru was found abandoned in the sagebrush off exit 205, a desolate turnoff called Pumpernickel Valley. Patrick was gone. The dog was gone. And neither one of them has ever been found. Patrick Carnes was not the kind of 86-year-old who needed help crossing the street. He was a decorated World War II veteran who'd served in the Solomon Islands, one of the most brutal, disease-ridden campaigns in the Pacific Theater. He'd survived that. He was, by every account from family and authorities, sharp, physically active, and fully in command of his faculties. He lived independently in Reno. He drove himself. He traveled. He had recently been in Toledo, Ohio, evaluating retirement facilities, not because he was declining, but because he was planning ahead. This was a man who was still making strategic decisions about his own future. And then there was Lucky. Lucky was Patrick's dog, a 100-pound Akita mix. If you're not familiar with the breed, Akitas are big, powerful, intensely loyal, and deeply territorial. They don't warm up to strangers. They guard their people and their space with a kind of primal, hardwired devotion. Lucky went everywhere Patrick went. They were driving home together from Ohio when they crossed into Nevada on the night of April 13th. Remember that. A man and a massive dog. Both vanish. No trace of either. At approximately 9 o'clock on the evening of April 13th, just after crossing the Utah-Nevada border near the town of Wells, Patrick is pulled over by a Nevada State Highway Patrol trooper. The violation is minor. He failed to change lanes for an emergency vehicle on the shoulder. Standard stuff. We have the dashcam footage, and this is important because it's the last confirmed visual record of Patrick Carnes alive. The interaction is brief, friendly, and completely unremarkable. Patrick rolls down his window. He explains to the trooper that he's been following a semi-truck, using it as a guide on the dark highway to get himself back to Reno. The trooper nods, just gives him a verbal warning, and sends him on his way. Patrick's speech is clear. His reasoning makes sense. There is no slurring, no confusion, no sign of cognitive impairment whatsoever. He is an alert, lucid old man driving home with his dog. But there's one detail in that footage that investigators have chewed on for years. During the conversation, Patrick glances toward the passenger side of his vehicle. He does it more than once. It's subtle, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you watch the tape a dozen times looking for it. Some analysts think he's just checking on Lucky. Others have wondered whether there was someone else in that car, someone the dashcam couldn't see, someone Patrick was nervous about. That's speculation, but the glances are real. They're on the tape. The trooper releases Patrick at around 9:15 p.m. as his planned overnight stop was Elko, about 50 miles west, a straight shot down the 80. Maybe 45 minutes of driving. He never makes it to Elko. The next morning, April 14th, Patrick's dark green Subaru is discovered roughly 150 miles west of where the traffic stop occurred. Not at Elko, which was 50 miles away. 150 miles past the traffic stop. He blew right through his planned destination and kept driving for another 2 hours into the emptiest corridor of the entire interstate. The car was found off exit 205 in Humboldt County, between the tiny outposts of Golconda and Battle Mountain in a stretch of road that runs through Pumpernickel Valley. If you've never heard of Pumpernickel Valley, that's because there's no reason you would have. It's not a town. It's barely a name on a map. And it's just sagebrush, silence, and a 2-lane off-ramp that goes nowhere. But here's the thing about the car. It wasn't parked on the shoulder like a man who pulled over because he was tired. It had been driven a significant distance off the asphalt, crashing through dense sagebrush. And when it finally came to rest, it was facing toward the interstate, not away from it, toward it. That's wrong. If a driver falls asleep or veers off the highway accidentally, the car's momentum carries it forward, away from the road. The vehicle drifts in the direction of travel. You don't end up pointed back at the highway unless someone deliberately turned the car around. Either Patrick drove off the road, stopped, turned the vehicle to face the interstate, and then vanished, or someone else repositioned that Subaru after the fact. Let's walk through the theories, because every single one of them has a problem the size of a canyon. Theory 1. Patrick was elderly, got confused, pulled off the road, wandered into the desert, and died of exposure. This is the default assumption whenever an older person vanishes. And on the surface, it's not crazy. Nighttime temperatures in April in northern Nevada drop fast, and the sagebrush terrain is brutal to navigate on foot. But think about the mechanics. Patrick was 86. Even a fit 86-year-old is not covering enormous distances over rough ground in pitch darkness. The search teams that deployed the next day, and in the days following, ran massive grid searches radiating outward from the car. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers on foot, they found nothing. No clothing, no tracks, no remains. In open desert, a body doesn't just sink into the earth. Scavengers scatter bones, sure, but large skeletal elements, a pelvis, a skull, femurs, those persist in arid environments for years, decades. They found none of it. And that brings us to the single biggest problem in the entire case. The dog. Lucky weighed 100 pounds. A 100-pound Akita mix is not a chihuahua that a coyote drags off in the night. This is a large, powerful animal. If Patrick collapsed somewhere in the brush, what did Lucky do? Dogs, especially breeds like Akitas, stay with their person. They guard the body. They don't just trot off into the void. And if Lucky did wander away, a 100-pound dog wandering the Nevada desert is something that gets noticed. Someone hits it with their car. A rancher spots it. It shows up at a truck stop. A dog that size leaves tracks, scat, Fur on fences, something. They found nothing. No dog, no collar, no remains, not a single hair. You can construct a plausible scenario where an old man dies in the desert and his body is scattered by animals over time. It's grim, but it's possible. What you cannot easily construct is a scenario where an old man and a 100-pound dog both vanish from the same location in open terrain without leaving a single biological trace. The combined mass of those two beings is nearly 300 pounds. It doesn't just evaporate. Theory 2, someone intercepted Patrick on the highway. Maybe a staged breakdown, maybe a fake law enforcement stop, maybe someone flagged him down at a rest area. He pulls off at exit 205, or is forced off, and whatever happens next, both he and the dog are loaded into a second vehicle and taken somewhere else. Beauty the Subaru is then repositioned in the brush, pointed back at the highway to make it look like an old man simply wandered away. Under this theory, the car's orientation makes sense, the total absence of biological evidence makes sense, and the disappearance of both a man and a massive dog makes sense, because they were physically removed from the scene. Now, this is where the case goes from deeply unsettling to something that genuinely chills the blood. 5 years before Patrick Carney's vanished, in 2006, a woman named Judith Casaita disappeared along Interstate 80. Her abandoned vehicle was found at exit 205, the exact same exit, the exact same remote, nameless stretch of Pumpernickel Valley. What are the odds? Interstate 80 runs for over 400 miles across Nevada. There are dozens of exits, hundreds of turnoffs, thousands of square miles of empty desert, and two people, 5 years apart, vanish from the same pinpoint on the map? Investigators in Humboldt County noticed the overlap immediately, and it disturbed them deeply. Because that kind of geographic repetition doesn't happen by accident. It happens when something or someone is using a specific location for a specific purpose. Long-haul trucking routes and remote highway corridors have long been studied by the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative as hunting grounds for mobile predators. A serial offender operating along A80 would have the advantage of enormous geographic range, zero witnesses, minimal surveillance, and a victim pool of isolated, vulnerable motorists traveling through the most desolate terrain in the lower 48 states. Exit 205 might not be a random breakdown spot, and it might be a kill site. Somewhere in the digital archives of the Nevada Highway Patrol, there's a dashcam recording of a polite, clear-eyed 86-year-old man explaining to a trooper that he's just following a truck home to Reno. He gets a warning. He thanks the officer. He rolls up his window and drives west into the dark. That's the last time anyone saw Patrick Carnes. His dog was in the passenger seat. His plan was simple. His mind was sharp, and within a few hours, both he and Lucky were gone, pulled out of the world so completely that the desert gave back nothing. Not a bone, not a collar, not a footprint. Interstate 80 is 400 miles of asphalt, cutting through a wilderness that has been swallowing people for as long as people have been crossing it. And exit 205, that nameless little off-ramp in Pumpernickel Valley, the one that goes nowhere, has now done it twice. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe if you're driving through northern Nevada late at night and you see a figure standing on the shoulder near a desolate exit, you keep driving. There's a particular kind of cruelty that only exists when you combine money, desperation, and a city that was built from the ground up on the principle that the house always wins and the losers disappear quietly. Las Vegas, October 1978. Not the Las Vegas you're picturing. Forget the family-friendly mega resorts, the Cirque du Soleil billboards, the Instagram influencers posing at the Bellagio fountains. That city doesn't exist yet. The Las Vegas of 1978 is rawer, darker, and far more dangerous. The mob still has its fingers in the casino vaults. Teamsters' money is flowing through construction projects like water through a cracked dam. Men like Tony Spilotro are running the street-level operations with baseball bats and blowtorches. This is the Vegas of Casino and The Godfather, where fortunes are made in the front of the house and bodies are buried behind it. The neon still glows, the slot machines still ring, But underneath that manufactured glamour is a city where violence is transactional and people are commodities. And on a blindingly hot Wednesday afternoon, October 25th, 92 degrees, 10 degrees above normal for late October, a 6-year-old boy was pulled off a school playground in broad daylight and never seen again. Cary Daniel Sayegh was 6 years old. He had a gap between his front teeth, the kind of detail that shouldn't matter, but somehow makes you see him as a real kid instead of a name in a case file. He attended the Albert Einstein Hebrew Day School in Las Vegas, a small, tight-knit private school. His family was affluent. In 1978 Las Vegas, when being visibly wealthy wasn't just a lifestyle, it was a risk factor. In a city where organized crime treated extortion like a line item on a balance sheet, a rich family with a young child was, in the coldest possible terms, a target with leverage. Cary was 6. He didn't know any of that. He was just a kid eating lunch and running around a playground on a hot Wednesday, lunchtime recess. The schoolyard is loud, chaotic, full of kids. Teachers are supervising, but it's the organized chaos of any elementary school at midday. Dozens of small bodies running in every direction, shouting, playing. The sun is blazing. There is no cover, no shadow, no darkness to hide in. This is not a dimly lit parking garage. This is not a secluded trail. This is a wide-open, populated, supervised schoolyard at high noon. And in that environment, someone took Cary Sayegh. A classmate reportedly saw Cary being forced into a vehicle by an adult male. The car pulled away. And just like that, in the time it takes for a teacher to turn her head and look back, a child was gone. Let's stop here and think about the logistics of what just happened, because it's important. Snatching a child from a crowded schoolyard in the middle of the day is not an impulsive act. You don't stumble into that. You have to know the layout of the school. You have to know the recess schedule. You have to know where the blind spots are, which angle of approach lets you pull a car close without being immediately visible to every adult on the property. You have to know which kid is Cary and where he'll be standing, and you have to execute the entire thing in under 2 minutes. Because that's the window before someone notices a child is missing and a strange car is leaving. This wasn't desperation. This was surveillance. This was planning. And whoever did it had either watched that school long enough to learn its rhythms, or they had inside information about how it operated. That same afternoon, the Sayegh family receives a phone call. The voice on the other end demands a ransom, reported to be a sizable sum in the range of $500,000. In 1978 money, that's roughly $2.5 million today. The caller says, pay the money, get your son back, and then nothing. No follow-up call, no instructions for a drop, no proof of life, no second demand, no negotiation. The kidnapper calls once, names a price, and vanishes into silence. Now, this is where it gets strange, because this single detail breaks the entire logic of a kidnapping for ransom. Think about it. Ransom is a transaction. It requires communication. The kidnapper needs to tell the family where to bring the money, what denominations, what time, what happens if they involve the police. There has to be a back and forth. That's how extortion works. You maintain leverage by proving the hostage is alive, and you give instructions that allow the exchange to happen. Without that communication chain, there is no deal. There is no money. The entire point of the crime collapses. So why make one call and disappear? There are really only 2 explanations, and neither one is good. Either something went catastrophically wrong almost immediately after the abduction. Cary was injured or killed accidentally or deliberately, but making the ransom uncollectible, or the ransom call was never the point. It was a misdirection, a red herring, a way to make police focus on extortion while the real motive, whatever it was, played out in the dark. Within the first weeks of the investigation, one name kept surfacing: Gerald Howard Burgess. Burgess had a prior connection to the Sayegh family. He'd done work for Cary's father. He had a criminal record that included convictions for tax evasion and sexual assault. And he did something that, in the world of criminal profiling, is a massive red flag. He kept inserting himself into the investigation. This is a well-documented behavioral pattern. Perpetrators, particularly those driven by narcissism or a compulsive need for control, are drawn back to the investigation of their own crimes. They show up at vigils. They offer to help search. They call the tip line with invented leads. They befriend the victim's family. It looks like concern from the outside. From the inside, it's a man standing over a chessboard, watching the other players try to find the piece he already removed. Burgess was arrested and charged with Carrie's kidnapping in 1981. The case went to trial, and he was acquitted. No body, no physical evidence linking him to the abduction, no forensic proof. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence and behavioral analysis, and in the eyes of the jury, it wasn't enough. Burgess walked out of that courtroom a free man. Now, this is where your blood runs cold. Fast forward more than 20 years, it's the mid-2000s. The FBI and federal prosecutors have reopened the Syed case as part of a broader investigation into Burgess's activities. During an undercover operation targeting him for an entirely separate crime, agents are running surveillance. A wire is hot, and Gerald Burgess, not knowing he's being recorded, starts talking. He describes in casual, almost instructional detail the perfect method for making a body disappear permanently. Weld it inside a steel drum. Let that land. A man who was tried and acquitted for the kidnapping of a 6-year-old child, a child whose body has never been found, is caught on federal audio surveillance calmly explaining how to encase human remains in welded steel so that no one will ever find them. Is that a confession? Legally, no. He doesn't name Carrie. He doesn't reference the 1978 case directly. A defense attorney would call it morbid speculation, dark humor, the ramblings of a disturbed man. And they'd be right that it doesn't meet the evidentiary bar for a conviction. But let's apply common sense for a second. What are the odds that a man acquitted of a kidnapping where no body was ever recovered just happens, decades later, to volunteer, unprompted, on tape, a detailed, specific technique for permanently concealing human remains? That's not morbid curiosity. That's not a hypothetical. That is a man who has thought about this deeply, practically, over a very long period of time. The FBI brought the renewed investigation forward, but no new charges were ever successfully secured. The tape exists. It sits in an evidence locker somewhere, and it proves nothing and everything at the same time. So here's what haunts investigators about this case, and it's not the who. Most people involved in this case, law enforcement, the family, journalists who've covered it for decades, believe they know who took Carrie Syed. The torment is the why and the how. If this was purely about money, the plan failed at the most basic operational level. One phone call, no follow-up, no collection. A professional extortionist doesn't do that. Which means either Burgess was incompetent, possible, but a man who pulls off a daylight schoolyard abduction is not incompetent, or the money was never the real objective. Burgess's prior conviction for sexual assault introduces a far darker possibility that investigators have never been able to publicly rule out. The abduction was predatory, and the ransom call was a hastily improvised smokescreen designed to redirect the investigation toward financial motives and away from what actually happened to Carrie in the hours after he was taken. And then there's the 1978 Vegas question. Was Burgess acting alone? In a city where organized crime operated openly, where violence against families was a known enforcement tool, was this a lone predator or a contracted job? Could someone have paid Burgess to take the boy as a message, as retaliation, as leverage in a business dispute, and the ransom was window dressing on something far more calculated? There is no body. There has never been a body. And without one, the justice system remains frozen, caught between overwhelming suspicion and the constitutional requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, somewhere on a reel of FBI surveillance tape, a man describes how to seal a human being inside a steel drum so they'll never be found. And somewhere in the vast sun-blasted desert that rings Las Vegas like a moat, a desert that has been swallowing secrets since the city was built, there may be exactly that. A steel drum, rusting slowly in the heat, holding what's left of a boy with a gap in his teeth who was eating lunch on a playground in 1978. The neon keeps glowing. The slot machines keep ringing. And Carrie Sayegh has been missing for 47 years. Nobody has ever collected the ransom. Nobody has ever been convicted. And nobody has ever brought him home. Here's the thing about paranoia. It's terrifying no matter which way it cuts. If the person is wrong, if the voices and the shadows and the feeling of being hunted are all manufactured by a brain in chemical freefall, then you're watching someone be tortured by their own mind, and there's almost nothing you can do to pull them back. But if they're right, if the fear is real, if someone actually is following them, actually does want them dead, then every person who dismissed them as crazy just helped the predator get closer. The case of Star Palumbo is unbearable because even now, 26 years later, we genuinely do not know which version of that story we're living in. Reno, Nevada, in the spring of 2000. If Las Vegas is the polished billion-dollar theme park version of American Excess, Reno is its grittier, colder, a more unpredictable cousin. The famous arch over Virginia Street still glows, the biggest little city in the world. But behind the neon, the city runs on a very different engine. It's a transient town. People drift in and out constantly. Truck drivers, gamblers, seasonal workers, runaways, drifters. The casinos never close. The bars never close. There's a 24-hour quality to the place that sounds exciting on paper, but in practice means that at 3 a.m, the streets are populated by a very specific kind of desperation. It's the kind of city where a person can disappear into the crowd and nobody blinks. Just beyond the city limits, the landscape shifts so abruptly it feels like a magic trick. The neon stops, the noise stops, and suddenly you're staring at the high desert, vast, dark, freezing at night, and utterly indifferent to whether you survive it. Star Michelle Palumbo lived at the intersection of those two worlds, and in April of 2000, both of them swallowed her whole. Star was 25 years old, born into a military family that moved frequently before she settled in Reno in 1999 to live with her grandmother. She was 5'4", 115 pounds, with triple-pierced ears and a noticeable birthmark on the right side of her neck. She'd found legitimate work at a pawn shop in Sparks, the town that bleeds directly into Reno's eastern edge. By most accounts, she was bright and independent, the kind of person who could handle herself. But sometime in early 2000, something cracked. Whether it was chemical, psychological, circumstantial, or all three, Star's behavior began to shift in ways that alarmed everyone around her. She developed a severe methamphetamine addiction. The drug, which was epidemic in northern Nevada at the time, is clinically notorious for inducing paranoid psychosis in heavy users, auditory hallucinations, the unshakable conviction that you are being surveilled, followed, targeted. And Star was exhibiting every single one of those symptoms. She told friends that people were following her. She told her mother during a frantic phone call on April 25th that her phone was being tapped and that she feared for her life. She said she couldn't explain more over the line because they were listening. She was wired, hypervigilant, and absolutely convinced that a massive coordinated conspiracy was closing in on her. Now, if that's all you knew, you'd say, textbook stimulant psychosis, tragic, but clinically straightforward. Case closed before it starts, except for what happened at the El Dorado. In the days before she vanished, Star told people she had a very important date at the El Dorado Casino in downtown Reno. She borrowed a full-length mink coat from the pawn shop where she worked to dress up for the occasion. When she returned the coat, she was visibly shaken, terrified. She told co-workers that her date had unexpectedly died during their encounter. Now, this sounds like a hallucination. It sounds like the kind of grandiose, disorganized narrative that methamphetamine psychosis generates, a paranoid story that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. But here's the thing. Local police confirmed that a death was actively being investigated at the El Dorado during that exact time frame, and officers actually visited Star's workplace to question her about the incident. Stop. Read that again. The police came to her. They sought her out as a potential witness or person of interest in a real, documented death at a casino. This was not a hallucination. Something happened at the El Dorado. Someone died, and Starr was close enough to it that law enforcement needed to talk to her. If Starr witnessed a death, an overdose, a homicide, something connected to the kind of people who operate in Reno's underground economy, then her paranoia about being followed takes on an entirely different dimension. It's no longer a symptom, it's a survival instinct. On the night of April 26th, around midnight, Starr Palumbo was discovered sprinting across the restricted tarmac at Reno Tahoe International Airport. Let's sit with that image for a second. A 25-year-old woman in the middle of the night running across an active airport runway. She didn't have a ticket, she didn't have a boarding pass, she had somehow gotten past security and onto the tarmac itself, a restricted area that, post 9/11, would have triggered an immediate armed response, but in April 2000 was apparently porous enough for a panicked woman to breach. Airport police found her hiding behind a utility truck on the tarmac. She told the officer she was looking for her younger sister. Starr did not have a younger sister. Now, here's where the institutional failure begins. The officer had a choice. He could have arrested her for trespassing in a secure area. He could have initiated a psychiatric hold. She was clearly in crisis, clearly disoriented, clearly a danger to herself at minimum. Instead, he bought her story about the non-existent sister, drove her to the nearby Hilton Hotel and Casino, and dropped her off. He dropped a woman in the middle of a mental health emergency at a casino at 1 a.m. and drove away. Starr walked into the Hilton and was never seen again. But let's go back to the airport for a second, because there's a logic gap here that nags at me. If Starr genuinely believed that shadowy forces were hunting her, government agents, organized criminals, whoever the threat was in her mind, why would she run to an airport? Airports are surveillance fortresses, cameras on every corridor, security personnel, controlled access points. An airport is the last place you go if you're trying to hide from people with resources. Unless she wasn't trying to hide. Unless she was trying to get to the most public, was most populated, most watched place she could find at midnight because she thought the cameras and the crowds would protect her. She wasn't running from the surveillance, she was running toward it. Starr's vehicle was found, parked back at the Reno airport shortly after her disappearance. And what was inside that car is one of the strangest evidence inventories in any missing persons case I've ever covered. Inside the vehicle, investigators found her purse, her cell phone, and $600 in cash. $600. For a woman struggling with a severe drug addiction, an addiction that requires constant, expensive resupply, leaving behind that much cash is almost physically impossible. Addicts don't abandon $600. That money is survival. If Starr left it behind voluntarily, she was either so terrified that money no longer mattered, or she wasn't the one who left it. Next to the cash, officers found printed emails addressed to the White House demanding investigations into government stalking. Classic paranoid content, the kind of thing that makes investigators write mental illness in the margin and move on. But sitting right beside those emails were 2 detailed instructional manuals on how to successfully change your identity and disappear. Hold on. Those 2 things don't fit together. Rambling letters to the president are the product of a mind in chaos. Step-by-step guides to assuming a new identity are the product of a mind that is calculating, methodical, and planning ahead. Psychosis and premeditation don't usually coexist in the same glove compartment. Either Starr was swinging between total breakdown and cold-blooded strategic planning, or someone else put some of those items in that car. And then there was the drawing, a sketch found in the passenger seat depicting a woman bound and gagged. Nobody has ever explained who drew it or why it was there. 8 months after Starr vanished, in December of 2000, the owner of the Silver Dollar Casino in Elko, Nevada, about 250 miles east of Reno, reported a highly credible sighting. A young woman matching Starr's exact description was in the bar. She was calm, present, and functional. Then, an unknown man peered through the window of the establishment, and the woman's entire demeanor changed instantly. She became visibly panicked and fled the bar with another young woman. If Starr died in the desert in April, or she wasn't sitting in a bar in Elko in December. If the sighting is accurate, and the casino owner had no reason to fabricate it, then Starr was alive 8 months after her disappearance. Alive, but still running, still afraid, still looking over her shoulder at men in windows. And here's the detail that demolishes the simple drug-induced psychosis explanation entirely. A close associate of Starr's, known only as Angel, also vanished without a trace during the exact same window of time. 2 women, same social circle, same city, same time frame, both gone. One person disappearing during a meth-fueled breakdown is a tragedy. 2 people from the same circle disappearing simultaneously is a pattern. And patterns don't come from paranoid delusions. Patterns come from predators. The official theory is that Starr Palumbo, and in the grip of methamphetamine psychosis, wandered out of the Hilton and into the Nevada desert, where she died of exposure and the elements erased her. It's the tidy explanation, the one that lets everyone close the file. But it doesn't account for the $600 she left behind. It doesn't account for the identity change manuals. It doesn't account for the confirmed death at the El Dorado that police questioned her about. It doesn't account for Angel vanishing at the same time. It doesn't account for the credible sighting in Elko 8 months later. And it doesn't account for the drawing of a bound woman in her passenger seat. Starr Palumbo was either running from something that existed only inside her own fracturing mind, or she was running from something very real that operated in the dark spaces of a transient city where women disappeared and nobody asked too many questions. We don't know which. We may never know which. What we know is this. Whatever was chasing her, phantom or flesh, it chased her out of the neon and into the black. And the desert, as it always does in Nevada, kept what it was given. Here's what I need you to picture. It's a Sunday afternoon, December 13th, 2009. You're standing on a street called Savannah Springs Avenue in Henderson, Nevada, inside a gated retirement community called Anthem. The sun is out. It's around 60 degrees. Crisp, dry, perfect desert winter weather. The lawns on this cul-de-sac are manicured to the inch. Every driveway is power washed. The houses are all that same shade of expensive southwestern beige, with terracotta roof tiles and 3-car garages. Half of these homes have security cameras bolted above their front doors. This is the kind of neighborhood where somebody calls the HOA if your trash can is visible from the street on a Tuesday. This is not a place where people vanish. And yet, at 11:54 a.m. on that quiet Sunday, a white 2003 Chevrolet Cavalier pulls slowly into this dead-end street, parks near the curb, and a 30-year-old man steps out. He's holding what appears to be a manila folder. He crosses the street. He walks calmly down the sidewalk. His pace is steady, unhurried, deliberate, like a man who knows exactly where he's going. And then he walks out of the frame of a neighbor's security camera. And that's it. Stephen Kosher has not been seen or heard from since. Let's back up. Because to understand how strange this is, you need to understand who Stephen Kosher was, and more importantly, who he wasn't. Stephen was a 30-year-old devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, living in St. George, Utah. He held a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Utah. He'd worked as a digital ad guy at the Salt Lake Tribune before quitting because he hated the overnight shifts. He was clean-cut, close to his family, deeply embedded in his church community. He didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. His faith explicitly prohibited both. By every conceivable measure, Stephen Kosher was a normal, decent, predictable man. But here's the thing. In December 2009, America was still reeling from the Great Recession, and Stephen was getting crushed by it. He was unemployed in his field. He was 3 months behind on rent. His income had been reduced to handing out flyers for a window washing company. For a guy who'd been raised in a faith that places enormous cultural weight on professional success, marriage, and providing, and he had none of those things at 30, the psychological pressure must have been enormous. So when you first hear the broad strokes of this case, there's a temptation to say, depressed guy, financial ruin, walked off into the desert, case closed, tragic, but not mysterious. Except nothing, and I mean nothing, about the physical evidence supports that conclusion. Let's walk through the last 72 hours of Stephen Kocher's known life, because this is where the story stops being sad and starts being deeply, fundamentally weird. On December 10th, Stephen leaves St. George and drives 300 miles north to Salt Lake City. He stops for gas, we know this from his debit card, and then drives out to a rural ranch in Ruby Valley to visit his ex-girlfriend's parents. The ex isn't there. He has a meal with her folks, makes small talk, and leaves. A little unusual maybe, but not alarming. Now, this is where it gets strange. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, Stephen drives 1,100 miles. Let that number sink in. 1,100 miles, across remote stretches of Utah and Nevada through towns like Overton and Mesquite. No clear destination, no confirmed meetings, no hotel charges, just an enormous, frantic, looping odyssey across 2 states. And remember, this is a man who is 3 months behind on his rent and handing out flyers for pocket money. Gasoline isn't free. That kind of mileage burns through hundreds of dollars. Where was that money coming from? And more importantly, what was he doing out there? On the evening of December 12th, he surfaces back in St. George. He stops at a Kmart and buys Christmas presents for his family. Think about that for a second. A man who is supposedly spiraling toward suicide or a voluntary disappearance does not walk into a discount store 2 days before vanishing and buy wrapped gifts for the people he loves. That's the behavior of a man who expects to see Christmas morning. He goes home. His neighbors see him leave again late that night. And then, sometime in the early morning hours of December 13th, Stephen Kocher drives 135 miles south, straight into the Las Vegas metropolitan area, straight to a dead-end street in a retirement community where he knows absolutely no one. This is the centerpiece. This is the thing that keeps investigators and armchair detectives up at 3 in the morning. A resident's home security camera on Savannah Springs Avenue captured roughly 53 seconds of footage. It's black and white, slightly grainy in the way all residential security cameras were in 2009, but the image is clear enough. You can see Stephen's white Cavalier pulled to the curb. You watch the driver's door open. He steps out, and he's holding something. It's a white or light-colored folder. A manila envelope, maybe. Something flat, professional, rectangular. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't look around like someone who's lost. He doesn't check his phone. He closes the car door, crosses the street with purpose, and walks down the sidewalk toward the end of the cul-de-sac. His body language is calm, upright, and directed. He looks like a man walking into a job interview, like a man delivering a document, and then he passes the edge of the camera's field of view. Gone. He never comes back to the car. The Cavalier sits there for days. Eventually, a concerned neighbor calls it in. When police pop the trunk and search the interior, here's what they find: a half tank of gas, a shaving kit, winter coats, blankets, and the Christmas presents he'd bought at Kmart the night before. Back at his apartment in St. George, investigators discover he'd left behind his laptop and his phone charger. Hold on, let's stop right there. A man does not leave his phone charger at home if he plans to never return. In 2009, phones died in half a day. Leaving the charger behind is the behavior of someone who expects to be home by dinner. And the Christmas gifts, the shaving kit, the winter coat, these are not the possessions of a man walking into oblivion. These are the possessions of a man on an errand. Now, here's the detail that takes this case from baffling to genuinely unsettling. Stephen's cell phone didn't die on Savannah Springs Avenue. It kept pinging. At around 5 in the afternoon on December 13th, roughly 5 hours after the security footage, his phone registers on a cell tower several miles away from the parked car near Arroyo Grande Boulevard and American Pacific Drive. 2 hours later, it pings again, this time from a different sector entirely, near Sunset Drive and Stephanie Street. The next morning, December 14th, someone actively checks Stephen's voicemail. The signal is now coming from the intersection of US 95 and Russell Road. After that, the phone goes dark. Battery dead, never recovered. Let's think about this logically. Stephen was on foot. He parked his car and walked away carrying a folder. The distances between these cell tower pings are not walkable in the time frames recorded. You'd need a vehicle, but Stephen's vehicle was still parked on Savannah Springs, undisturbed, with the keys presumably gone with him. So either Stephen got into someone else's car, willingly or not, or someone else had his phone, and whoever had it checked his voicemail the next morning. That's not the behavior of a thief who swiped a phone off a body. That's someone monitoring his messages. That's someone who wanted to know who was looking for him. All right, let's do what everyone does with this case. Let's run through the theories and see which ones actually survive contact with the evidence. Theory 1. He was job hunting. People say, well, he had a folder. Maybe he was going door to door handing out resumes. Okay, but who goes door to door looking for work in a wealthy residential dead-end cul-de-sac in a gated retirement community on a Sunday afternoon? These are retirees. There are no businesses on that street, no offices, just identical beige houses with 2-car garages. That theory makes zero sense when you actually look at the geography. Theory 2, he was meeting someone. The folder, the purposeful walk, it does look like a man arriving for an appointment. But investigators tore through his phone records, his emails, his text messages, his entire digital life. Stephen Coker had no known connection to anyone in Henderson, no calls to that area code, no emails arranging a meeting. If he was meeting someone, that meeting was arranged through a channel that left absolutely no digital trace. In 2009, that's unusual for a tech-literate 30-year-old. Theory 3, he just walked away, started a new life. But think about the mechanics of that. You drive into a dead-end street, park your car neatly, leave your Christmas gifts in the back seat, walk away carrying nothing but a single folder, and somehow construct a completely new identity. With no money, no passport, that was still at his apartment, no change of clothes, barefoot into a second life. People who plan to disappear take cash, fake IDs, and a head start. They don't park in a cul-de-sac in broad daylight in front of security cameras. Theory 4. Foul play. Someone grabbed him or killed him. And honestly, the evidence leans hard in this direction. But even this theory has a massive gaping hole. This is a neighborhood with security cameras on every other house. It's broad daylight. It's a quiet Sunday. If someone attacked Stephen Coker on that sidewalk, how did they do it without a single camera catching the act? Without a neighbor hearing a struggle? Without leaving a drop of blood on the concrete? The man walked out of one camera's frame. The next camera apparently didn't pick up anything at all. He slipped into a gap between lenses and simply ceased to exist. And then there's the darkest theory, the one that actually accounts for most of the evidence. Stephen was broke, desperate, and drowning. Maybe someone offered him easy money, a courier job. Drive this here, deliver that there, don't ask questions. It would explain the 1,100-mile road trip with no clear destination. It would explain the sudden, unexplained cash for gasoline. It would explain the manila folder, a delivery, not a resume. And it would explain why he drove into a wealthy neighborhood where he knew no one. He was making a drop. The problem is, whatever he walked into on the other end of that sidewalk, he never walked back out. It's been over 16 years. Despite national media coverage, extensive desert searches, the FBI getting involved, and internet sleuths dissecting every pixel of that security footage, Stephen Coker is just gone. No body, no bones, no wallet in a ditch, no deathbed confession, nothing. What we have is 53 seconds of black and white video showing a man heading to a meeting, a car full of Christmas gifts that were never opened, a phone that wandered across Henderson for 18 hours in someone's pocket before going silent, and a family that has spent 16 years watching their son walk calmly to the right, out of frame, over and over and over again. The camera captured everything, and it captured nothing. Stephen Coker walked to the edge of the frame, and he stepped right off the face of the earth. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in the deep Nevada backcountry. It's not peaceful. It's not calming. It's the silence of a place that does not care whether you live or die. The Seven Troughs district sits about 27 miles north of a tiny town called Laughlin, out in Pershing County. If you've never heard of it, that's the point. There's nothing out there. No gas stations, no cell towers. This is 1978, so there aren't cell towers anywhere. But even by the standards of the era, this place is profoundly empty. It's high desert, sagebrush, steep ravines, crumbling mine shafts left over from a silver boom that went bust 60 years earlier. The dirt roads are rutted and treacherous. During the day, temperatures can push past 90 degrees. At night, they crater into the low 40s. The elevation shifts are sudden and brutal. If your car breaks down out here, you are not calling a tow truck. You are walking alone into a landscape that has been killing unprepared people since the 1800s. In September of 1978, a 72-year-old woman drove a lime green Datsun station wagon into this wasteland. She never came back out. And when her car was finally found 4 years later, what was inside raised questions that are far more disturbing than the disappearance itself. Nan Cecile Dixon was not a fragile person. Let's get that out of the way immediately, because when you hear 72-year-old woman alone in the desert, your brain jumps to a certain image. Frail, confused, vulnerable. That's not who Nan was. She was small, 4'8", maybe 4'10", or about 115 pounds, with graying red hair and a preference for those practical 1950s-style house dresses. She lived in Grass Valley, California, and she was, by every account, fiercely independent and deeply stubborn. The kind of woman who made a decision and followed through on it whether the people around her approved or not, and she had made a decision. Nan's brother, Harry Layton, lived on a remote mining claim out in the Seven Troughs area. The two of them hadn't spoken since 1961. The falling out was about money. Nan had lost $6,000 in a failed mining venture that Harry and their other brother, David, had operated. $6,000 in the early 60s was not a small sum. It was a grudge worth holding. But David had recently died, and something about that death softened the edges of 17 years of silence. Nan decided it was time to forgive the debt, drive out to Harry's claim, and make peace. She asked her husband to come. He said no. She asked a friend. Also no. Nobody wanted to make that drive. So Nan packed a suitcase, drew herself a hand-drawn map of the route, loaded a .22 caliber pistol for protection, climbed into her lime green 1976 Datsun B210, and drove into the desert completely alone. That was September 21st, 1978. She stopped at a Texaco station in Lovelock, charged $4.18 of gasoline, and headed north on the unpaved roads toward Seven Troughs. She never arrived at Harry's claim. She never came home. She never called. When Nan didn't return, her family sounded the alarm. The Pershing County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale search. Ground teams, aerial sweeps, private detectives the family hired on their own dime. They covered the exact route Nan would have taken from Lovelock North into Seven Troughs. They flew over the ravines, the dry washes, the old mining roads. They found nothing. Now, hold on. Let's talk about what they were looking for. A lime green Datsun station wagon, not gray, not brown, not the color of dust or sagebrush, lime green. In a landscape that is almost entirely composed of muted browns, tans, and pale greens, a lime green car should light up like a flare from the air. That's the kind of thing a pilot spots from 1,000 feet up without even trying. They didn't find it. Not in 1978, not in 1979, not in 1980 or 1981. Then, on Thanksgiving morning of 1982, 4 full years later, 2 coyote hunters hiking through a steep remote mining area called Eager Pitcher, about 27 miles north of Lovelock, stumbled down into a ravine and found themselves staring at a rusted, rat-infested Datsun station wagon sitting at the bottom. It was Nan's car. Nan was not inside. This is the part of the story where I need you to slow down, because every single detail inside that car creates a new question that contradicts the last answer. Let's start with the car itself. The Datsun was at the bottom of a steep ravine below the main road. If you're picturing a violent crash, a car careening off a cliff, tumbling end over end, the physical evidence doesn't support that at all. The tires were heavily scuffed, yes, but they still held air. The gas tank was half full. The damage that had been done to the vehicle was almost entirely to the clutch, which was completely destroyed. That's not crash damage. That's the damage you get when someone grinds a manual transmission trying to drive a car out of a ditch over and over until the clutch burns out completely. Someone tried to get that car back on the road. They failed. But here's the first major problem. This ravine was inside the search grid. Aircraft flew directly over this area in 1978. A lime green car does not become invisible. It doesn't camouflage itself against desert rock. So how did trained search teams miss it for 4 years? The most logical explanation, and the one that makes the hair on your neck stand up, is that the car was not in that ravine in 1978. Someone hid it. A garage, a barn, a deep mine shaft. And then, long after the searches ended and the case went cold, someone drove it out to eager picture and dumped it there to make the whole thing look like an accident. Now, let's open the door and look inside. Because this is where it gets truly strange. Investigators found 4 completely empty cartons of cigarettes scattered in the cabin. 4 cartons. That's 800 cigarettes. Nan Dixon was a very light smoker, and these weren't even her brand. Think about that for a second. A 72-year-old woman who occasionally smokes does not sit in a ditch and power through 800 cigarettes of a brand she doesn't buy. That volume of smoking, over what would have to be days or weeks, points to someone else. Someone was in that car, someone who smoked heavily and waited. Then there was the tape. A length of black electrical tape with a single strand of gray hair and a tiny fragment of human tissue attached to it. Hair with tissue still clinging to the root means that hair was ripped out, not shed naturally. You don't lose a chunk of scalp by bumping your head on a steering wheel. That's the kind of evidence that implies force, violence, restraint. And then, scattered across the vehicle's exterior, investigators documented bloodstains on the tire, the wheel rim, and the trunk mat. Not inside the cabin where you'd expect blood from a car accident victim. On the tire, on the trunk. Those are the locations that tell a story about a body being moved, not a person dying quietly in the driver's seat. The .22 caliber pistol Nan brought for protection? Gone. Never recovered from the scene. And then there's the note. This is the single most debated piece of evidence in the entire case. Inside the car, investigators found a barely legible, unsigned, torn piece of paper. Handwriting experts eventually deciphered it, and what it says is haunting. I'm going to paraphrase the key section. It describes someone being told to get a gun and end their nightmares, but the writer refuses, saying that suicide is an unbearable shame, that only God gives life and only God can take it, and that they would never be left by a just God far from habitation with a beating heart. Now, law enforcement looked at this note and immediately stamped the case. Suicide. Case closed. They auctioned off the Datsun. They lost the physical evidence, the tape, the tissue samples, the note itself. All of it. Gone. But wait a minute. Read that note again. That is not a suicide note. That is the exact opposite of a suicide note. The writer is explicitly theologically rejecting the concept of taking their own life. They're saying, I will never do this. If Nan wrote those words, she was declaring that no matter how desperate her situation, she would not kill herself. So how does a note that explicitly refuses suicide become the evidence that closes the case as a suicide? And if she didn't write it, then someone else left it there. A staged note designed to look just ambiguous enough to make a rural sheriff's department close the file and move on. Which is exactly what happened. Nan's family didn't accept the suicide ruling. They spent over $40,000 hiring private investigators. And the theory they assembled is chilling but entirely plausible for 1970s rural Nevada. The Seven Troughs area was remote, unpatrolled and riddled with flat open terrain that could double as improvised landing strips. During this era, small plane narcotics smuggling was rampant across the rural American West. Light aircraft would fly low to avoid radar, drop drug shipments in prearranged coordinates, and disappear. The drops happened at night in empty places exactly like Seven Troughs. The theory is this: Nan, navigating those labyrinthine dirt roads with her hand-drawn map, accidentally drove into the wrong place at the wrong time and witnessed a cartel airdrop in progress. The people running that operation could not afford a witness. She was killed. Her body was disposed of in the desert or down one of the hundreds of abandoned mine shafts that honeycomb the region. Her car was hidden, possibly driven into a mine or tucked inside a structure until the heat died down. Then, years later, it was staged in the ravine with the planted note and the destroyed clutch to simulate a sad, lonely accident. It's a theory, but it accounts for every single anomaly. The missing car during active searches, the foreign cigarettes from a second occupant, the hair and tissue from a violent encounter, the blood on the trunk and tires, the stolen pistol, and a note that was supposed to close the case, and did. The discovery of Nan Dixon's Datsun didn't solve the mystery. It deepened it into something far darker than a missing elderly woman on a desert road. Every object inside that car, the cigarettes she didn't smoke, the hair torn from a scalp, the blood in all the wrong places, and a note that screams the opposite of its intended message, is a piece of a puzzle that was deliberately scrambled by someone who understood that in a place this empty, the truth dies easy. The physical evidence was auctioned off or lost. The case was closed. And somewhere in the vast indifferent silence of the Seven Troughs desert, Nan Cecile Dixon is still out there, buried under rock or sagebrush or 100 feet of abandoned mine shaft, exactly where someone put her. She drove into the desert to forgive an old debt. The desert gave her nothing back. Las Vegas sells you a story. You've seen the commercials, the helicopter shots of the Strip at sunset, the infinity pools, the celebrity chef restaurants, the tagline that promises whatever happens here stays here. It's a fantasy machine, engineered from the architecture down to the carpet patterns to make you feel free, reckless, and safe all at the same time. But there's a different Las Vegas, one that doesn't make the brochures. It operates in the same zip code, sometimes in the same buildings, but it exists in a parallel dimension that tourists never see. It's a city of back pages and burner phones, of escort agencies that are fronts, of women moved between cheap motels on the outskirts of town, by men who own their IDs, their money, and their fear. The United States Department of Justice has consistently ranked Las Vegas among the top destinations for domestic human trafficking in America. Not because Vegas attracts more evil than other cities, but because its entire infrastructure is built on anonymity, cash transactions, and the constant churn of strangers who arrive and leave without anyone tracking them. In 2006, a 21-year-old Canadian woman named Jessie Foster fell through the trapdoor between those two cities. She went to Las Vegas on vacation. She never came home. And the story of how she disappeared is not a mystery about what happened in the desert. It's a story about what happened in plain sight, inside hospitals and police stations and courtrooms, while everyone whose job it was to help her looked the other way. Jessie Edith Louise Foster was born May 27, 1984, and grew up between Kamloops and Calgary in British Columbia and Alberta. Her family describes her the way families always describe the person they're desperate to find: vibrant, funny, full of life, the kind of girl who could light up a room. And in Jessie's case, that description comes with the painful weight of the past tense, because the woman her family saw at Christmas in 2005 was not the same person they'd said goodbye to a few months earlier. In May of 2005, Jessie and a friend took a road trip from Canada down to Florida. On the drive back north, they stopped in Las Vegas. Her friend went home. Jessie didn't. She told her family she'd met someone. She was in love. She was staying. The details were vague. The excitement was real, or at least that's how it sounded on the phone. For a 21-year-old in a city designed to intoxicate you with possibility, the story wasn't hard to believe. People move to Vegas on impulse every day. It's part of the brand. But within weeks, Jessie's new life in Las Vegas began to look nothing like the dream she'd described. By June of 2005, 1 month after arriving, Jessie was working for an escort agency. She was arrested for solicitation. She was hospitalized with a broken jaw. 1 month, 30 days. That's how fast the trapdoor opens. Let's slow that down. Because people tend to skim past those details like bullet points, and they're not bullet points. They're the stages of a textbook trafficking operation. Stage 1. Target someone young, ideally from out of town, ideally without a local support network. Stage 2. Isolate them from family and friends. On Stage 3, introduce dependency, emotional, chemical, financial. Stage 4, deploy violence to establish absolute control. Stage 5, force them to work. Jessie was a 21-year-old Canadian national in a city where she knew no one except the man she'd supposedly fallen in love with. She had no local family, no established friend group, no independent income. She was a foreign citizen, thousands of miles from home, in a country where she had no legal support system. From a predator's perspective, she was the perfect candidate. The broken jaw is the detail that should stop every reader cold. A shattered jaw doesn't come from a fall. It doesn't come from a minor altercation. It comes from a deliberate, crushing blow to the face, the kind of injury that requires surgery, wiring, weeks of recovery. It is an act of total physical domination, and it is one of the most common control mechanisms in the trafficking playbook. Break someone's body so severely that they understand, on a primal level, what will happen if they disobey. Jessie came home to Canada for Christmas in late 2005. This was the last time her family saw her in person, and what they saw terrified them. The vibrant, hilarious girl they knew was gone. In her place was someone hollowed out, exhausted, distant. Her family could feel it. Something dark and unnameable had happened to her. But Jessie wouldn't talk about it. She couldn't, or she'd been trained not to. Traffickers don't just break your body, they colonize your psychology. They convince you that no one can help you. They convince you that your family will be hurt if you speak. They convince you that because you've been arrested, because you've done things you're ashamed of, no one will believe you anyway. Jessie went back to Las Vegas after the holidays. The phone calls became less frequent. The tone became flatter. And then, in March of 2006, the calls stopped entirely. Her family raised the alarm. But by April 2006, Jessie Foster had vanished from the North Las Vegas area without a trace. This is the part of the story that should make you furious, because it's not about what we didn't know. It's about what we did know and did nothing about. Jessie Foster was arrested by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. She was in the system. Her fingerprints were on file. Her mugshot was taken. Like a law enforcement officer looked at a 21-year-old Canadian woman with visible injuries and processed her as a criminal. Not a victim, a criminal. Jessie Foster was admitted to a hospital with a shattered jaw. Medical professionals examined her, treated her, and discharged her. A doctor looked at a young woman with an injury that is a textbook indicator of intimate partner violence and trafficking, and released her back into the custody of whoever brought her in. Here's the logic gap that should keep you up at night. We have spent billions of dollars building systems, law enforcement, hospitals, social services, that are supposed to identify and rescue people exactly like Jessie Foster. She was standing inside those systems. She was physically present in a police station and a hospital. And every single checkpoint that was designed to catch her situation failed. Not because the information wasn't there, because nobody asked the right questions, or worse, because they asked and the answers didn't fit neatly into the paperwork. This is what advocates call the less dead phenomenon. When the victim is a sex worker, when she has an arrest record, when she's a foreign national involved in the underground economy, the institutional urgency to investigate her disappearance drops to nearly zero. She's not a missing suburban mom or a kidnapped child. She's a prostitute who stopped showing up. And in the eyes of a system that's already overwhelmed, that barely registers as a case. Jessie Foster was not an isolated disappearance. Between 2003 and 2006, 4 sex workers vanished from the same geographic area of Las Vegas. 4 women. Same neighborhood, same 3-year window. The bodies of 3 of them were eventually recovered in the surrounding desert. Jessie's body has never been found. Now, think about what that cluster means. If a single predator was responsible for all 4 disappearances, The fact that 3 bodies were recovered in similar desert locations suggests a consistent disposal method. Jesse breaking that pattern, no body, no remains, no trace, means either she was taken by someone different or the killer changed his method specifically for her. Neither answer is comforting. In 2015, investigators got what looked like a break. A man named Neil Falls was shot and killed in West Virginia by a sex worker who fought back when he tried to murder her. Police found handcuffs, axes, a machete, and a list of potential victims in his car. See, Falls was a transient killer who targeted sex workers across the country, and investigators immediately examined whether he had been operating in Las Vegas during the window when Jesse and the other women disappeared. No definitive public link was ever established, but the investigation into Falls remains ongoing. When the Las Vegas police investigation stalled, and it stalled almost immediately, Jesse's mother, Glendine Grant, did something extraordinary. She refused to accept the institutional inertia and became, in effect, the lead investigator on her own daughter's case. Grant founded an organization called Mothers Against Trafficking Humans. She hired private investigators. She retained bounty hunters. She contacted the FBI. She launched media campaigns that crossed international borders, dragging Jesse's story out of the cold case filing cabinets and into the public eye. She did this not because the system was working and she was impatient. She did it because the system had looked at her daughter, a young woman who had been beaten, arrested, hospitalized, and disappeared, and shrugged. During the investigation, Grant's team identified a specific person of interest connected to Jesse. Police searched his property using luminol, a chemical that detects invisible blood traces even after aggressive cleaning. The result was completely negative. No biological evidence whatsoever. And here's the part that defies belief. Despite being the primary person of interest in the potential homicide of a young woman, this individual was never formally interrogated about Jesse's disappearance. Not once. Jessie Foster didn't vanish into the desert. She didn't walk off into the wilderness. She disappeared inside the city itself, inside the neon, the noise, the relentless anonymous churn of Las Vegas. She was swallowed by an industry that operates in the seams of America's most famous playground, one that depends on the fact that millions of people will visit this city every year and never once look past the lights. She was arrested and nobody helped her. She was hospitalized and nobody asked. She was disappeared and nobody noticed, until a mother in Canada decided that her daughter was not disposable and spent the next 2 decades proving the system wrong by doing its job for it. Jessie Foster has been missing since 2006. She would be 41 years old. And somewhere behind the glittering facade of the Las Vegas Strip, in the city that promises you can be anyone, she became no one. Every case in this series has a setting that contributes to the horror. The empty desert highway at night, the windowless casino floor, the abandoned mining district. The places where people vanish tend to feel, in hindsight, like places built for vanishing. Dark, isolated, far from help. This one is different. This one happened on a sidewalk, in a suburb, at 3 in the afternoon, on a summer Sunday, in a neighborhood where people were mowing their lawns and kids were riding bikes. And that's exactly what makes it the most terrifying case in this entire series. Lemon Valley sits just north of Reno, Nevada. In 1987, it was the kind of community that real estate agents describe with words like family-friendly and quiet. Single-story ranch houses on wide lots, chain-link fences, pickup trucks in driveways, a 7-Eleven on the corner. It was not glamorous, it was not exciting, it was safe. That was the entire selling point. June 28, 1987. It's a Sunday afternoon, and it's hot. The temperature is pushing toward 88 degrees, which means the asphalt is radiating well over 130. Summer break is in full swing. The neighborhood has that lazy domestic energy that suburbs have on hot weekend afternoons. Sprinklers clicking, screen doors banging shut, the distant drone of a lawnmower. Jennifer Lee Martin and her older sister Colleen have spent the weekend baking and cooking together at their home on Surge Street. It is, by every possible metric, a completely normal Sunday. At around 3 o'clock, Jennifer decides she wants to walk to the 7-Eleven on Lemon Drive to buy some candy and a soda. The store is less than a block away. Not a mile. Not half a mile. Less than a block, a few hundred feet from her front door. She's walked this route dozens of times. She's 11 years old, and in 1987, an 11-year-old walking to the corner store on a Sunday afternoon is not a risk. It's a Tuesday. She leaves the house barefoot, wearing a grayish-purple sweatshirt dress. No shoes. That detail matters, and we'll come back to it. She walks to the store. She buys her candy and her soda. The clerk sees her. She's fine. She's a kid buying junk food on a hot day. She walks out of the 7-Eleven and turns toward home. And somewhere in the next few hundred feet of suburban sidewalk, Jennifer Lee Martin ceases to exist. Jennifer had moved to Nevada from Clearwater, Florida, about 10 months before she disappeared. She was 11, with facial freckles, pierced ears, and a collection of small scars and birthmarks that her family cataloged in agonizing detail after she vanished. 2 hairline scars under her chin, a coffee-stained birthmark on her right hip, white bumps on her back, and a distinctive star-shaped scar on the inside of her upper right arm. The kind of details parents memorize when they're trying to help the world identify their child. Her family described her as independent, assertive, and remarkably cautious for her age. This is important. Jennifer was not a naive, overly trusting child. She was the kind of kid who kept her parents informed about where she was going. She was the kind of kid who, her family said emphatically, would never willingly get into a vehicle with a stranger. She knew the rules. She followed them. This was 1987. The Stranger Danger campaign was at its peak, but every kid in America had been drilled on the basics. Don't talk to strangers, don't accept rides, don't take candy from people you don't know. Jennifer's family was confident she had internalized every one of those lessons, which creates the first and most fundamental logic gap in this entire case. If Jennifer wouldn't get into a car with a stranger and she was taken from that sidewalk by someone in a car, then either she was overpowered so quickly she had no chance to resist, or the person driving wasn't a stranger at all. Here's the timeline, and it's brutally tight. Jennifer leaves the house at approximately 3 p.m. She walks to the 7-Eleven, a trip that takes a few minutes at most. She buys candy and a soda. She exits the store and begins the short walk back to Surge Street. Not at around 3:20 p.m., roughly 20 minutes after she left, her older brother realizes she's been gone too long for such a short errand. He walks to the 7-Eleven to look for her. He scans the route. She's already gone. 20 minutes. That's the entire window. From the moment she left her front door to the moment her brother went looking, the total elapsed time is approximately 20 minutes. And within that window, subtract the time it took her to walk to the store, browse, pay, and begin walking back. The actual window in which the abduction occurred, the span of time between Jennifer exiting the 7-Eleven and her brother arriving to find her gone, is probably closer to 5 minutes, maybe less. 5 minutes, on a residential street at 3 in the afternoon, on a Sunday in June when half the neighborhood is outside. Let's walk through the physical evidence, or rather, the complete absence of it, because this is what makes the case so maddening. Jennifer had just purchased candy and a soda. She was carrying them. If someone grabbed her by force, yanked her off the sidewalk, shoved her into a vehicle, she would have dropped those items. A can of soda hitting asphalt makes noise. A bag of candy scatters. Those items become evidence markers. They tell you exactly where the abduction happened. Nothing was found. No dropped candy. No soda can on the curb. No wrapper. The sidewalk between the 7-Eleven and her house was completely clean. Either Jennifer was holding her snacks when she got into a vehicle, which implies she entered willingly, or someone cleaned up after the abduction, which implies a level of post-crime scene management that is deeply sophisticated for a crime committed in broad daylight on a public street. Now remember, Jennifer was barefoot. The ambient temperature was 88 degrees. On a sunny June afternoon in Nevada, asphalt surface temperatures exceed 130 degrees. If someone tried to drag a barefoot 11-year-old girl across hot pavement, she would have fought. She would have screamed. Her feet would have left scuff marks or friction burns on the road. there would have been physical evidence of resistance. There was none. The scene was sterile. No scuff marks, no dropped items, no screams heard by neighbors, no evidence of any kind that a crime had occurred on that stretch of sidewalk. It's as if the earth opened up, swallowed her, and closed again without leaving a seam. There is one lead that has never been resolved. During the narrow window of Jennifer's disappearance, witnesses reported seeing a light-colored Toyota Corolla in the immediate vicinity of the route between the 7-Eleven and Surge Street. Law enforcement investigated. They accounted for every other vehicle that had been in the area that afternoon. They cleared them all, except the Corolla. The driver of that car was never identified, never located, and never cleared. A light-colored sedan in a residential neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't look threatening. It looks like someone visiting a friend or someone lost and checking an address. An 11-year-old girl walking barefoot down the sidewalk would have no reason to be alarmed by it. And if the driver rolled down the window and said something, asked for directions, offered a ride because the pavement was hot, said he knew her parents, there would have been no struggle, no dropped candy, no scream. Just a child climbing into a car and a door closing quietly behind her. That's the scenario that accounts for all the evidence, or rather, all the absence of evidence. A smooth, practiced approach by someone who understood how to make a child feel safe enough to cooperate, and then vanish with her in a vehicle that blended perfectly into the suburban background. Law enforcement classified Jennifer's disappearance immediately as a non-family abduction. This was not a custody dispute. This was not a runaway. An 11-year-old girl does not walk to a convenience store, spend her pocket money on candy, and decide in the next 3 minutes to abandon her life. The runaway theory insults the evidence, and it insults the family. The speed and silence of the abduction has led cold case investigators to focus on one terrifying possibility: a local predator. Not a stranger passing through town, someone who lived in or frequented the Lemon Valley area, someone who knew the neighborhood's layout, the sight lines, the traffic patterns, the blind spots. Someone who knew that the stretch of sidewalk between the 7-Eleven and Surge Street had a brief window of low visibility. Someone who had possibly watched Jennifer before and knew her routine. Investigators have explored connections to convicted sex offenders living in or near the area at the time, but without physical evidence, without a witness to the actual abduction, and without the Corolla ever being traced, the case has remained frozen for nearly 4 decades. There's one more detail about this case, and it's the one that will stay with you. Jennifer's sister and mother have never changed their home telephone number. Since 1987, the same landline, the same 7 digits. For nearly 40 years, they have kept that number active on the fractional, desperate, irrational hope that Jennifer is alive somewhere and might one day pick up a phone and dial the only number she ever memorized as a child. That's not evidence. That's not a clue. That's the sound of a family that never got an answer, holding the line open in case one ever comes. We spend a lot of time in this series talking about the Nevada desert, the empty highways, the abandoned mines, the vast, indifferent landscape that swallows people and never gives them back. And those settings are terrifying in their own right. But the Jennifer Lee Martin case is a different kind of terror. It's the kind that happens in the most familiar place you can imagine, your own street, your own sidewalk, the walk to the corner store you've done 100 times. It's the realization that the distance between safety and catastrophe isn't measured in miles of desert. Sometimes it's measured in a few hundred feet of suburban concrete in broad daylight with the neighbor's home. Jennifer Lee Martin walked out of a 7-Eleven with a bag of candy and a soda, turned toward home, and never made it to her front door. No scream, no evidence, no witness, no answer. Just a light-colored car that nobody can find and a phone number that still rings to a house that has been waiting since 1987. Most of the cases we cover on this channel exist in a fog. We don't know who did it, we don't know why. We're left staring at a wall of contradictions, grasping at threads that dissolve the moment we pull. This one is different. With the Roy Frisch case, we know exactly who did it. We know exactly why. We even have a pretty good idea of when and how. The mystery isn't the crime. The mystery is the body. Because in 92 years, nobody has ever found it. And the reason nobody has ever found it tells you everything you need to know about how completely, how totally, how suffocatingly the mob controlled a city called Reno in the spring of 1934. To understand what happened to Roy Frisch, you have to understand what Reno, Nevada was in 1934. Because it was not the ski town adjacent craft brewery Reno of today. It was, by almost any measure, one of the most lawless cities in the United States. It's the middle of the Great Depression. The country is on its knees, but Reno is booming. And the reason it's booming is that Reno will let you do things that other cities won't. Quick divorces, 6 weeks of residency and you're free, which made it the divorce capital of America. Gambling, technically illegal in most forms, but operating openly, with the wink and nod blessing of local officials. And underneath the gambling, a full ecosystem of organized crime, bootlegging, loan sharking, money laundering, extortion. The city was, in practical terms, owned by a handful of men. At the top sat George Wingfield, Nevada's richest man, a former mining baron, turned banking magnate and political puppet master who controlled the state's economy with an iron grip. Below him, running the street-level underworld, were William Graham and James McKay, casino operators, convicted criminals, and connected gangsters who had transformed Reno into a safe harbor for some of the most dangerous fugitives in the country. And when I say dangerous, I mean nationally, historically dangerous. Because one of the men Graham and McKay were harboring in Reno was a baby-faced bank robber from Chicago named Lester Gillis. You know him better as Babyface Nelson. This is the world Roy Frisch walked into on the night of March 22, 1934. A world of silent alliances, absolute power, and men who understood that the cleanest solution to a legal problem was to make the problem disappear. Roy Frisch was 46 years old, and he was a glaring anomaly in this ecosystem. A World War I veteran, a former Reno City Councilman, and the Washoe County assessor. He lived with his mother and sisters. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He didn't gamble. In a city that ran on all three vices, Roy Frisch was the straightest arrow in the quiver. He was also the head cashier at the Riverside Bank, an institution owned by his neighbor, George Wingfield. And that job is what killed him. Because Roy Frisch didn't just balance ledgers. He saw where the money went. He knew which accounts were real and which were facades. He understood the financial architecture that connected Wingfield's banking empire to Graham and McKay's criminal operations. In early 1934, federal prosecutors indicted Graham and McKay on massive mail fraud charges. The case was complex, built on paper trails and financial records. And the government's star witness, the man who could walk a jury through every fraudulent transaction, every laundered dollar, every cooked book, was the meticulous, teetotaling, ramrod-straight bank cashier who lived 3 doors down from the richest man in Nevada. Roy Frisch was subpoenaed to testify on April 2, 1934. He never made it to the courtroom. The evening of March 22, 1934. It's a Thursday night. The weather is chilly, mid-50s dropping into the upper 30s after dark with a light wind. Roy's sister is hosting a bridge game at the family home at 247 Court Street. Roy doesn't play cards. He tells his sister he's going to walk downtown to the Majestic Theater to catch a film called Gallant Lady. He'll be back early. The Majestic Theater is 4 blocks from his front door. 4 blocks of well-lit, a residential Reno sidewalk. He's walked this route 1,000 times. He's a recognizable figure, impeccable posture, a distinctive, slightly swinging gait that people who knew him could identify from a block away. Roy Frisch walks out the front door, turns toward downtown, and steps into oblivion. He never buys a ticket at the Majestic. He never takes his seat. He never returns home. There is no scream, no witness to a struggle, no speeding car, no blood on the sidewalk, no torn fabric on a fence. Nothing. A 46-year-old man with a recognizable walk vanishes from a 4-block stretch of a small city's downtown on a night when people are out on their porches and walking their own routes home, and not a single human being sees or hears anything. 11 days later, on April 2nd, the federal trial of Graham and McKay begins. The prosecution calls its star witness, "The chair is empty." The government's case, gutted of its most critical testimony, collapses. Let's talk about how this was done, because the precision of it is almost more terrifying than the act itself. Reno in 1934 had a population of about 18,000 people. It was not a sprawling metropolis. It was a small, walkable city where most residents knew each other by sight. Roy Frisch, with his distinctive posture and gait, was even more recognizable than average. Abducting him silently from a residential street, no struggle, no witnesses, no evidence, required either extraordinary luck or extraordinary planning. It was not luck. The prevailing theory, supported by historians and criminologists who have studied the case for decades, is that Graham and McKay contracted the job to babyface Nelson and his enforcer, John Paul Chase. Both men were confirmed to be in the Reno area on the night of March 22nd. Nelson, despite his reputation for reckless explosive violence, was also a professional who understood the mechanics of targeted killing. The likely scenario is staggeringly simple. A car pulls alongside Frisch as he walks, someone he recognizes, possibly someone connected to the bank, possibly someone Graham or McKay sent as a familiar face, calls out to him. He approaches the car, he's pulled inside. The door closes, the car drives away. Total elapsed time, 15 seconds. No screaming because there's no time to scream. No struggle visible from the street because it happens inside the vehicle. No witnesses, because a man getting into a car in a quiet street at dusk doesn't look like a crime. It looks like a friend offering a ride. That's how you make a man disappear in 4 blocks. You don't overpower him on the sidewalk. You make the abduction look voluntary. This is the true mystery. Not who killed Roy Frisch, not why, but where he is. A $2,000 reward was posted in 1934, a fortune during the Depression. Nobody claimed it. A nationwide manhunt produced nothing. In 1941, 7 years after he vanished, Roy Frisch was legally declared dead. The theories about his final resting place have become part of Reno's dark folklore, and every one of them tells you something about the kind of power these men wielded. Theory 1. The mine shaft. Northern Nevada is honeycombed with abandoned silver and copper mines, hundreds of them, scattered across the mountains surrounding Reno. Some of these shafts drop hundreds of feet straight down into the earth. You could lower a body into one of these voids, and it would never be found without exact coordinates. The surrounding desert is vast, the shafts are unmarked, and in 1934, there was no technology capable of scanning underground cavities. This is the most commonly cited theory, and it's the one that explains the permanence of the disappearance most cleanly. Theory 2. The boss's backyard. Roy Frisch lived at 247 Court Street. George Wingfield's mansion was at 219 Court Street. They were neighbors. The rumor, persistent, whispered, never proven, is that Frisch was murdered and buried in the sprawling grounds of Wingfield's own estate. The audacity of this theory is what makes it so chilling. You don't bury a body in your own yard unless you are absolutely certain that no one will ever search it. And in 1934, Reno, George Wingfield controlled the police, the politicians, and the press. Who was going to dig up his garden? Theory 3. The foundation. This is the darkest legend of all, and the one that is seeped deepest into local mythology. The story goes that Frisch's remains were poured into the concrete foundation of one of Reno's early casinos or commercial buildings, sealed permanently into the infrastructure of the city itself. It's the kind of rumor that sounds like a movie pitch, but in a town where the mob literally built the buildings, it's not as far-fetched as you'd think. There's one more detail about this case, and it's the one that stays with me. After Roy disappeared, his family kept the front porch light on at 247 Court Street. Every night. They left it burning so that if Roy somehow, someday, found his way back through the dark streets of Reno, he'd be able to see the house. They kept that light on for decades. Roy Frisch never came home, but every night, for years upon years, a small bulb burned on Court Street, a tiny, stubborn act of hope aimed at a man who was almost certainly dead before the light was ever switched on. On April 2, 1934, the federal government called its star witness and the chair was empty. Graham and McKay's case weakened. The fraud machine kept running. The mob kept its grip on Reno. And the straight-arrow bank cashier who knew too much was already gone, folded into the desert or the earth or the concrete of a city that was built quite literally on secrets. Roy Frisch's disappearance is Nevada's oldest and most enduring cold case. It's not a mystery about what happened. It's a monument to the kind of power that can make a man cease to exist so thoroughly that 92 years of searching haven't turned up a single bone. The house always wins. And in 1934, the house didn't just win. It erased the evidence that the game was ever rigged. There's a river running through the middle of Reno. Most people don't think about it. You're in a casino town. Your eyes are on the lights, the signs, the noise. But if you walk 2 blocks south of Virginia Street, past the last row of slot parlors and wedding chapels, you'll hit the Truckee River. It's not wide. It's not dramatic. In the daytime, it looks almost charming. Joggers on the riverwalk, kayakers in the summer, little footbridges connecting one bank to the other. At 3 in the morning in early May, it's a different thing entirely. The water is snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada, barely above freezing. The current is fast and deceptively strong, strong enough to pull a grown adult under before they can get their footing. The banks are dark. The riverwalk is empty. The casino glow doesn't reach the water. You are, in the space of a 2-minute walk, transported from one of the loudest, brightest, most crowded environments in America to a strip of black rushing water where nobody can see you and nobody can hear you. On the night of May 4th, 2005, a 30-year-old woman walked away from a downtown Reno nightclub, made a few frantic phone calls, and was last seen near those dark banks. She has never been found. Not in the river, not on the shore, not anywhere. Jennifer Raylene Casper Ross was 30 years old, and she was living at the exact intersection where immense potential meets severe vulnerability. On one side of the ledger, she was brilliant. A former professional ballerina whose career was cut short by a fractured tailbone. She'd pivoted hard, enrolled at the University of Nevada, Reno, made the dean's list, and was a year away from completing a degree in biomedical engineering. She was a mother. She was, by any academic measure, on her way to something remarkable. On the other side, she was drowning. She struggled with severe bipolar disorder and was prescribed multiple psychotropic medications that she frequently mixed with alcohol and illicit drugs, a combination that is, pharmacologically, a lit match in a room full of gasoline. She carried significant financial debt. Her marriage to Sean Ross was volatile and toxic. She'd been working as a showgirl and exotic dancer and had been fired from her dancing job just a week before she vanished. The walls were closing in from every direction. On the night of May 4th, Jennifer went out, and the version of her that walked into that club was not the Dean's List student or the devoted mother. It was the version that was unmedicated, intoxicated, and careening toward a crisis that had been building for weeks. According to her husband, Sean Ross, he came home that evening to find Jennifer already heavily intoxicated. She had fresh slash marks on her wrists. She'd packed a red shoulder bag with clothes and family photographs, and she was insisting she needed to leave, needed to get to Las Vegas to see her father. Sean says he tried to stop her. He says he couldn't. She left. Sometime that night, Jennifer ends up at the Peppermill Hotel and Casino with a friend, drinking. Witnesses at the bar notice the cuts on her arms. She's agitated but functional, talking, ordering drinks, present enough to hold a conversation, but visibly not okay. At around 5 in the morning on May 5th, using her friend's phone, Jennifer calls her father in Las Vegas. She tells him she desperately needs to see him. The call is short and frantic. At 5:30 a.m., Jennifer takes a taxi to the Reno Sparks Cab Company on Gentry Way. She's looking for her mother, Carla Brown, who works there. But Carla isn't on shift. Jennifer doesn't have the money to pay the cab fare. She panics, and then she runs. She bolts from the taxi, barefoot. She's broken her high-heeled shoes at some point during the night. She jumps a fence at the rear of the cab company's lot, and she disappears into the pre-dawn shadows of Reno. That is the last confirmed sighting of Jennifer Casper Ross. Now, this is where it gets strange, because after Jennifer vanishes over a fence at 5:30 in the morning, the person you'd expect to sound the alarm, her husband, Sean Ross, does not report her missing for 5 days. 5 days. Your wife is bipolar, off her medication, drinking heavily, has fresh self-harm wounds on her wrists, and disappears into the night. And you wait until May 10th to call the police? Sean's explanation was that he assumed she was on a bender and would come back on her own. Maybe. People who live with partners in crisis do sometimes develop a numb tolerance for disappearing acts, but 5 days is not a delayed reaction. 5 days is a void, and it's not just the delay. Sean missed 5 consecutive days of work immediately after Jennifer disappeared. He sold her van before police had a chance to conduct a thorough forensic examination of the vehicle. And 3 months after she vanished, he filed for divorce from a woman who was, legally, still a missing person. Each of those facts, taken individually, has a plausible, innocent explanation. Taken together, they form a pattern that investigators in Jennifer's family have never been able to reconcile with the behavior of a man who simply assumed his wife was out partying. Before she left the house that night, Jennifer left behind 2 handwritten notes. One dictated custody of her young son, the other transferred all of her possessions to Sean. Both were stained with her blood. Official forensic handwriting analysis confirmed that the writing was Jennifer's. The blood was Jennifer's. On the surface, they read like the final instructions of a woman who had decided she wasn't coming back, a suicide note dressed up as a will. But here's the thing. Jennifer's mother pointed out a detail that complicates the entire picture. Jennifer and Sean had a bizarre, intimate habit of practicing and mimicking each other's handwriting. They did it regularly. It was a game between them, a strange, specific skill that meant Sean could replicate Jennifer's hand well enough to fool a casual observer. Now, the forensic expert said the writing was hers. And maybe it was. But if your husband has spent months learning to copy your handwriting, and then notes in your handwriting appear on the night you disappear, notes that conveniently give him custody of your child and ownership of everything you have, that's not a detail you can ignore. It's not proof of forgery, but it's enough to make you read those letters a second time with very different eyes. The most commonly assumed explanation is the simplest and saddest one. Jennifer, in a severe manic episode, heavily intoxicated, barefoot, and bleeding, wandered away from the cab company and ended up at the Truckee River. She fell in, or walked in, and the freezing current took her. Hypothermia sets in within minutes in snowmelt water. Drowning follows shortly after. It's tragic, but it's physically plausible. Except for one enormous problem. They never found her. The Truckee River is not the Mississippi. It's not a mile wide. It's a manageable, searchable waterway that flows through a populated urban corridor before eventually emptying into Pyramid Lake. When someone drowns in the Truckee, the body surfaces. Clothing snags on rocks, a shoe washes up on a bank, remains are recovered downstream. Search and rescue teams know this river intimately. They searched it. They searched it extensively. They found nothing. No clothing, no shoe, no remains, no trace of Jennifer Casper Ross in or along the Truckee River. The water gave nothing back. And here's the detail that makes the river theory even harder to accept. The Reno Police Department, in later public appeals for information, explicitly stated that they believe Jennifer's body is located not in the Truckee River, not in downtown Reno, but across the state line in Laughlin, Shasta, or Plumas County, California, over 100 miles away. Think about what that means. The police don't think she drowned in the river 2 blocks from where she was last seen. They think her body is in the mountains of Northern California. They have never publicly explained why they believe this, which strongly implies they possess unreleased evidence, cell phone pings, vehicle tracking data, or suspect movement records that points to someone driving Jennifer's body 100 miles west into the wilderness. A woman who drowns in a river does not end up in a California mountain range. Someone put her there. Shortly after Jennifer vanished, Sean Ross told her mother something chilling. He said he believed Jennifer was dead and in the river. Let's unpack that. Your wife has been missing for days. There is no body. There is no evidence of drowning. There is no reason, at that early stage, to assume she's dead at all, let alone dead in a specific location. People go missing and turn up alive constantly, especially people in mental health crises who often surface at shelters, hospitals, or with friends days later. So why is Sean Ross so certain, so quickly, that his wife is not just missing but dead? And why does he specify the river, as if he already knows the answer to a question the police haven't solved yet? It could be the gut instinct of a man who lived with Jennifer's illness and feared the worst. That's possible. But combined with the 5-day reporting delay, the sold van, the handwriting game, and the immediate divorce filing, it lands differently. It lands like a man who knows more than he's saying. Jennifer Casper Ross jumped a fence behind a cab company at 5:30 in the morning, barefoot and bleeding, and vanished. The easy answer is the river. The truckie was right there, dark, fast, cold, and deadly. It's the answer that requires the least imagination and the fewest villains. But the river gave nothing back. And the police aren't looking in the river. They're looking in the mountains of California, 100 miles away, for reasons they have never made public. Somewhere between the neon of downtown Reno and the silence of the Sierra Nevada foothills, Jennifer Casper Ross stopped being a missing person and became a question that nobody has been able to answer for 21 years. The line between safety and danger that night wasn't the riverbank. It was whatever happened in the hours after she went over that fence, hours that remain, to this day, completely dark.